Hello everyone, and welcome to this episode from the RICS Tech Partner Program. My name's Andrew Knight, and I've been with RICS for over 10 years now, working in our standards, regulatory and thought leadership directorate. My role, as well as looking after this Tech Partner Program, is to look at the implications of data and technology right across the built and natural environment from the perspective of our profession, our members, and indeed the various stakeholders that our profession employs. And the aim of this partner program is to really bring some interesting, engaging content about how data and tech can bring incredible benefits to the profession and indeed the stakeholders who rely on surveyors right around the world, right around the full life cycle of property across residential, commercial, office, infrastructure, etc. And I'm really pleased today to have Mike Darby from Demand Logic with me. So Mike, do join me, and let's start the call.
Hi, Andrew. Good to see
Hi,
you. Thanks
Mike.
for having me.
Pleasure, great to have on board today. And I guess the first thing we're always interested to hear is a bit of a backstory on the firm itself, how it was founded, and a kind of a bit of a backstory on the principals and the team, the kind of skills and background experience that you've got, because we always find that can be a very interesting window into the types of firms that work in data and tech and real estate.
Yeah, sure. So Demand Logic, I mean, my background is building services engineering. I've been a building services engineer since school, actually. Went kind of straight in as an apprentice. And that old. And so I was kind of, I suppose, fortunate enough to be old enough to have seen buildings start to go digital, I suppose. So when you think about all of the building automation systems that we have today, the clever building management systems, computerized, embedded devices controlling those buildings, I kind of saw them start to materialize. And as a kind of nerd of the day with my ZX Spectrum, I was quite intrigued to see how, programming was actually affecting the real world rather than just something you were looking at on your screen. So I found that really intriguing, and I kind of got more and more involved with building management systems, got quite excited about the way that the data that was being generated and the interaction between all of the things that work a building was becoming visible, so just starting to get them out of the ceiling and in front of some key stakeholders, I suppose. So I got really excited about that. I ended up working for various building management systems companies myself. I had my own BMS company for about 10 years. And really what happened with Demand Logic was that as a kind of BMS reseller, I was realizing, it was painfully obvious, in fact, the volume of data that buildings were now generating, and it is a huge amount. But what was missing at that time was that the data is going largely lost. It's not getting in front of the right people, not being stored for any great length of time, if at all. And there was no way, no tools to analyze it all quickly. You were kind of manually sitting down in a basement on a cable drum with a laptop, kind of looking at these things and going, well, that doesn't look right. And then it's kind of working your way using, I suppose, a mixture of intuition and complaints in a building to try to work out what was going on. So it was obvious, really, an obvious next step. I felt that that somehow we should be able to make better sense of that. And I used to have those same conversations with some friends who are now colleagues down the pub, basically explaining how, this is wrong. This must, we should be able to do this better. Fortunately, I think very fortunately, in fact, they were from different backgrounds to me. I think had they been from the same background, we probably would have gone away and made another BMS and it's quite such an impact. But so my co-founders, Dan and Joe and Niels, have a variety of backgrounds that they all overlap. We have a kind of key overlap in the middle. One is obviously a desire for sustainability, but that kind of tech and engineering side really is what slots us all together. So Dan is a kind of data management specialist. Joe is a physicist and web designer. So he's a great translator of kind of translating grubby engineering rules of thumb into kind of a more pure data model. And Niels, the other co-founder, is a mathematician and embedded device expert. So we were really lucky, I think. I think, and it is luck to get that mix of people in the room at the same time, who between the four of us, we were actually able to build a prototype system. So we decided to build something that could get data out of buildings really quickly, that could then upload it to the cloud, try to come up with some kind of user experience, rudimentary user experience that would show those analyses and bring them in front of the right people. So that's what we did. We started, building that system. We fortunate to get some early Carbon Trust grant money. We then did a very early pilot with King's College in London, who were they'd been a customer of my BMS company, so kind of leveraging those relations, the trust that you build up, I suppose, to let somebody experiment their new technology in your buildings, which was quite pivotal for us. So that pilot was pretty successful. We found a huge amount of energy savings potential. That got us on the road to a kind of a commercial proposition. And from then we've kind of grown more or less organically, but building up on that team. So we've introduced additional skills. We got the best developers in the business. They're a super cool team. Been a real eye opener for me coming from my background to see them at work. But then additionally, we've brought in skills from the FM world and also from property management, because they are, as you probably know as well as anyone, very strange industries to work. Slightly fragmented, one might think, but having that kind of deep understanding of how all of those parts of property management slot together, I think has been really key for us.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly, it always comes across, I think, loud and clear that kind of, as you say, that there is a degree of fragmentation in terms of the disciplines across the real estate sector and property generally, and that mix of skills is key, isn't it? The best coders in the world need help with domain expertise and vice versa. So I think it's almost impossible for kind of prop tech, if one likes that term, to be a one-person piece, because you just need, and I know it's a cliche, you need these diverse teams in every way, don't you, to really deliver solutions that make sense.
Absolutely, yeah. It's there's been some real eye openers for me working, all the way across the spectrum of what we do. So from the root of our actual tool, talking to data specialists and them politely telling me that they're not going to do it the way I just said because that's ridiculous and not scalable and so on, all the way through to working with Jeff, who's a property manager by training, who's really opened our eyes about what is a core deliverable for a property manager, what's going to make them tick, how do we make our platform relevant for them. And then William, who's come from an FM background, and again, he sort of spotted some real key things, I suppose, in FM that have helped us, which has really been about helping FMs kind of deliver a service to their customers, but also trying to make their margins better. So instead of making them look bad by showing things haven't been working properly in the past, it's much more about progression, and showing how they can change their proposition, using data and all of the tools that the management of data provide you with.
That's great. Can you tell us a bit about the kind of range of buildings you work with? Because there's obviously big issues here, not only just in the different asset types, but the age of the assets. What's the kind of range and what are the challenges and opportunities you find, given that you must be looking at lots of different kinds of buildings in different settings?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a starting point for us was always bigger buildings. When I say bigger, a commercial building, typically 5,000 square meters and above, was a really good starting point for us. And there were, key reasons for that. One is that the likelihood is it would have a building management system of some description, so some degree of automation or some digital system that we could talk to. And the reason that's a starting point is because from a CapEx perspective, to get going with that data, all you need to do is start gathering the data. You don't need to, disrupt the operation of the building by retrofitting all sorts of devices. So you can be very, very quick. So that was the starting point for us. But from the perspective of what type of building, as long as you've got some kind of system in there like that, then one of the things I think that's evolved for us and been very exciting is the fact that it actually doesn't matter what the building type is. It doesn't matter how old the building is, as long as that visibility is there and the ability to analyze it is there. And one of the reasons I say that is that if you think about things like rating schemes, where you're trying to assess how well a building's working based on things like, the energy consumption, the energy intensity per square meter, then you get into all sorts of pickles with things like, the building type. You can't compare a brand new, super insulated, super airtight building with something old, leaky, and 9-inch brick walls, because it's simply not a fair starting point unless the latter building is going to have enormous capex to try and retrofit all of that. But what you can do is you can compare them absolutely directly on how well what they have is working. So both, both building types will have, some sort of heat generation, whether it's from gas or a heat pump or something, and they will have, or tend to have, some sort of cooling system, whether it's a VRF or, or centralized chillers or something like that. But if you can simply say to any of the building stakeholders that everything, all of those little assets within your building asset are working absolutely as well as they can, then you can give those buildings a fair comparison and say that building's doing absolutely as well as it can with what it has, and so is the absolutely brand new one. So that's why, sorry, so that's I waffled off there, but that's why we started.
No, but I think that's good, because for me it does highlight that assets are so heterogeneous, and for better or for worse, the majority of the building stock that we're dealing with is already here, but there's very little that's going to be newly built. And I know it's very easy to get, perhaps excited is the wrong word, but there's plenty of obviously very new assets that are being built in central business districts in developed economies that have got every widget and as you say, start off with a fabric that's very optimized already. But we are stuck to a large extent with an existing stock where you have to optimize what you can do given the state of the building without spending lots of capex. So we are where we are with a lot of stock, aren't we?
Absolutely, and I think in many cases, or if not the majority of cases, what you can do with what you have actually outweighs the marginal benefits that some of the super new buildings, within reason. When you've got some absolutely amazing new technology, then that can obviously take over. But there is a bit, there's a bit of an elephant in the room with new builds, is that by and large, as studies have shown, they're not running anything like as well as they were designed to. There's a lot of work by the Better Buildings Partnership, for example, comparing EPCs, so the theoretical energy performance of a building to actual energy consumption. There's one quite famous chart where it's basically a sawtooth with all these samples where they're categorized into their EPC ratings, and they simply don't correlate whatsoever with the actual energy performance. In fact, I think on that one, the median F-rated building performs better than the median A-rated building.
And I suppose that, sorry to interrupt that, but that is the challenge, I guess, between the kind of very publicly available rating systems and you can get compared to actual operational data. That performance gap, well, actually, yes, it's rated at a certain standard, but is it being run properly to deliver the potential that particular building grade could give?
Yeah, absolutely. And the other challenge there is that the more ambitious a new building is, and the more new technology, the more dedication, I suppose, you have to get to actually commissioning that and to get that working as well as it possibly can be. And you cannot, and this is something that I think that asset managers really need to recognize, is the fact that, as has been shown, recognized in things like soft landings, is that you can't just expect on the day of handover that building's going to be working perfectly. It isn't. It never is. With the best will in the world, zero defects is a myth. It's a great ambition, and you can get to it, but you're not going to get to it at the day of handover until a building's occupied and in use, and people start fiddling with it. And people start, the complaints start coming in, and the response to the complaints start being responded to, which can, in a all too often spiral of deterioration, can actually compound those problems. So that you've got to be ready for that, with a new build, and you've got to be ready to embrace, to be able to get it working as well as you can, deal with the unexpected ramifications. It's what's interesting actually, from a very personal perspective, is that I mentioned about kind of an early pilot, working with Kings in buildings that I had commissioned myself. And I had been very proud of them because when I left, I'm pretty sure it was running like a Swiss watch. And then you plug our system in, and one of the kind of early outcomes that I found was some of the things that I had personally commissioned and taken great pride in were working well some of the time. And then when things I hadn't foreseen, or a sequence of events in the building, like the thermal events in the building, occurred, then things would go into spasm, like a boiler sequencing, 6 big boilers that were ticking along quite nicely, 2.5 boilers matching the load perfectly. suddenly there's this unexpected load, and they ramp up to all 6, then they overshoot, and they ramp back down to 1, and that, you know, these sorts of things. To be able to be 100% sure that these things are working properly isn't a case of commissioning. It's not a case of, you know, periodically going and having another look. It's really about I mean, there's a phrase of, excuse me, of continuous automated commissioning,
Yeah.
which I really like that phrase, you know, and it's tantamount to the same thing. It's about analyzing performance and flagging up as soon as possible when something anomalous is happening. So I think that's really, there's a whole bunch of learning from the Innovate UK study about the, you know, the 50 new buildings going into use, about some of the things that went wrong. I think on that particular study, the average building was responsible for nearly 4 times the emissions for which it was designed.
Yeah.
You know, worst case it was 10 times, something like that. Now we really have to be ready for those things. And from a design perspective, we need to be designing in flexibility in the systems that are going into buildings, rather than necessarily putting them in to exactly the spec that you think the building is going to have. You know, that building is going to have a 20+ year lifetime, and by the time it gets to, you know, year 20, the interior will probably look absolutely nothing like the building that was specified. So unless there's some flexibility in those systems, they'll end up being torn out and replaced, you know, with the horrendous embedded carbon impact of that. If you can make those systems more flexible and keep them installed, then, you know, it's one, you get it working right in year 1, but then you can keep modifying it to suit and keep the optimal performance going.
Yeah, you intimated earlier on a comment about perhaps in the earlier days where you'd be sitting in that basement swamped with data that you could barely process. And I guess there's always sometimes a bit of a critique around particularly very smart buildings. I think back to when the Edge in The Hague was first sort of commissioned, it was producing more data than they could absorb. I mean, is there a danger that we still have situations where data is being produced for the sake of it, and that we're not getting that sweet point between the right amount of data to support the right kind of decisions and simply, you know, over censoring a building and almost putting too much technology in? Are we in danger of not getting the sweet point sometimes?
I think we're probably in danger of not getting the sweet point, but I would hesitate to say too much data. I think it's only too much data if you swamp someone with it. If you know, I'll give you a you know, first-hand example for us is that when we first started, we were manually picking out the bits of data in a BMS that we thought were really interesting and relevant, and then we would poll those. And then, you know, subsequently 3 months into a contract, you'd find suddenly someone needs to know something about something. Oh, we weren't polling that, so we don't know, so we'll start polling it now. And then as we progressed, and as our platform, not our platform, but our infrastructure got better and better at managing the traffic, because that's the hard bit with BMS, is not overloading it. So we realized that we were at the point where we could just say, we don't care what it is yet, we want all of it. So even if we don't understand what it is, we're going to start polling it. And that proved to be a really good decision, because you know, if you have 6, 9, 2 years data of you know, something that you weren't aware what it was, and something that doesn't appear to change ever, but then one day it does change, then once you've worked out what that is, and you can then feed that into any future analysis of any similar thing, then the value will be realized. So definitely the challenge is about what to do with the data that you have right now. You know, it's not really, I don't think it's ever about too much data. You know, it's only really too much data if you're just pouring it on someone and saying, what does that mean? You know,
so I suppose the opportunity there is using machine learning and other algorithms to deal with that big data, to say, as you say, to look at either very short-term events or longer-term trends that come out of a large feed of data that, as you say, pick up these 1 in 5 year episodes, which are still very much worth understanding. Or indeed, I suppose, episodes where an edge case is forced, as you say, some thermal event that, you know, is only going to happen once in a blue moon, but still needs to be dealt with.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you know, those edge cases are the things that can inform the structure of the future. And when I say the structure, like for us, one of the things I've really liked about the platform that we have now compared to my old world in BMS was because it's in the cloud, and because the way we analyze things, we only capture raw data. We don't contextualize it. on site and then upload contextualized data. That was a decision that the data experts
Oh, the
made.
techies
Not me. I was all for let's condition it there. They said no, because what if you condition it wrong? Then you're just
Yeah.
simply storing garbage. So we store just the raw, and we have a way of classifying that. Now, if you then subsequently find there's a better way of classifying it, because it's a cloud platform, the classifications apply to every existing instance that we've created of this thing, whatever it is, like a boiler or something.
Yeah.
If we then make a modification to that, everyone gets it straight away. All of the history is repaired, or not repaired, it's all the history is updated with this new analysis. So you're benefiting from that data, even though you didn't know you needed it at the beginning. So, and you mentioned about machine learning. I mean, a lot of our effort has been, so when, I suppose, again, part of the evolution, you kind of grab all this data and you wonder what's best to do with it. Can you just throw all the data at machine learning code and it will find faults? Well, I think the short answer is almost certainly you could. But what we decided to focus our kind of machine learning and I suppose the intelligence in the back of the platform on was actually contextualizing the data rather than just finding anomalies in it.
Yeah.
So if you contextualize it, and we're calling it a digital twin. I mean, and I think that's true. It's a digital twin is usually associated with like a 3D model of a building, but what we're looking at is actually a digital twin of building services. Which is far more exciting than a building, as I'm sure you're well aware. but if your platform knows the relationships between different assets, what knows which energy is being consumed by which thing, then you trace anomalies through back to the root cause. So the effort that we put in was about how to quickly and as automatically as possible, and we're not there yet, we're kind of semi-automated at this point, but how can you get some context behind that data? So create an asset model where you now have live data that means something consistently, in a language that is repeatable. And that's really where the value has come, because once you can do that, you find all of the anomalies because the model knows what good behavior should be, so it knows when a building isn't behaving in that way. But also that digital twin is then useful for other applications. So we can interface that with a CAFM system that recognizes all of those assets. You can interface it with a 3D model of the building. So suddenly you can have an augmented reality experience walking around the building, being an engineer who's never been in a building before can be taken directly to the root cause of the problem for which they've just been called out, with no experience whatsoever. So all of those kind of fringe benefits of adding context to data.
Yeah, and I think it's a very good point you make that there's that danger people fall into a trap of thinking that a digital twin is that kind of visual three-dimensional geometry rather than actually the beating heart of an asset in that way. I suppose the nearest analogy I can think of is in a previous life I did some work with Rolls-Royce, and that for a long time they've been doing that telemetry on their engines up in the air, and for them it's not looking at a picture of the engine. They want to understand how it's behaving and the issues it has, and keeping that engine in the air for as many hours as possible between maintenance, or indeed ultimately looking at instance where an engine's failed. So as you say, it's not some quote pretty picture, it's the beating heart of that machine, and understanding how it's performing, and once, as you say, having that history of indicators of when a machine might be needing service, or more scarily in that context about to fail, or showing those kind of signs. I mean, moving on to almost the kind of human side of it, one thing that I'd be really keen to get your insight on is who actually is responsible for a building. Is it the asset owner? Is it the tenant, the landlord, the FM firm? There must be I suppose, an interesting kind of, perhaps tension's too strong word, but there must be some interesting sort of incentives and issues for you in terms of who perceives the benefits and ultimately who shares in the benefits, as opposed to sharing the costs of any kind of work. What's that dynamic like for you?
That is the big question. It's challenging. And I think the industry there's a little bit of swirling going on where the industry is really trying to work out the answer to that. Because if you took the negative first, it's actually who is avoiding responsibility. That's too strong a word, I think. But there's a lot of this goes on. It's not us, it's them. So for example, in FM you see, here's a classic. So in many buildings, if not all buildings with air conditioning, you will see year-round simultaneous heating and cooling to one extent or another.
Mm.
You know, we've got buildings, seen buildings where it's 35 degrees outside and the heating is still on in some areas. Now, there can only be one reason for that, and that is that you're putting too much cooling in, and so you're having to fight it to avoid complaints. But one of the reasons why that happens is because FM has been, I suppose, beaten up as an industry for so long. You know, people literally demand, I want results now. And if a customer, you know, a building occupant is saying, I'm cold, now they might be cold because that air conditioning unit is actually blowing cold air down the back of their shirt, but like the immediate reaction is quick, turn up the heating in that area. And so that kind of, that vicious circle, you know, and those kind of interactions just compound and compound and get things worse and worse, are one of the first things that really needs to be addressed. So the occupant needs to understand the challenges that the FM has in actually delivering a comfortable building. And they need to understand, you know, this sounds patronizing, I suppose, but, you know, there are laws of physics. You know, if you're in an open plan office and, you know, 6 people on this desk, you can't all have exactly this, your preference of ambient temperature. It's impossible, you know, unless it's all about, and, you know, unless you can do it with clothing. So they've got to accept that there are tolerances, you know, within which the FM has done as much as they possibly can. There, you know, there are sides to that where, you know, in building services, often challenges of hot and cold are perception things. You know, often it's, you know, it's actually a draft blowing down the back of your shirt. Anyone who's sat near a, you know, a fan cooler where it literally is blowing straight down the back of your shirt, it is freezing. The ambient might be about right. So these are challenges that need to be addressed. I'm going straight so off your point, off your question. So it was really about who's responsible. I think these are some of the things that really need to be addressed. Is that collaboration between building occupants, tenants, and their FM teams, understanding that there's a shared mission to get this building working as well as possible, understanding that there's going to be a few broken eggs when you're trying to do that. You know, you are going to upset a few people, but being as open and collaborative about that as possible. All the way, and it does go all the way up to the asset manager. And again, we see such a range of I guess, intent from asset managers, ranging from I bought this thing, I'd probably sell it in 9 months, you know, so hopefully we'll make a few bob on it, all the way to the real pioneers. And we're working with some of them who absolutely, you know, it's about their brand. It's like, this is one of our buildings, so we are going to make it work as well as possible. And those really, I suppose, in terms of the biggest success in getting buildings working, I would say it's been that top-down approach, you know, where the asset manager has you know, rolled up the sleeves, cracked their knuckles, said, right, I'm getting all of the teams who work in there. I don't, you know, any of the skeletons in the closet, I don't care. There's an amnesty. It doesn't matter that the building wasn't working very well for the past 2 years. We're working in a different way now. And the occupants need to see that. They need to be happy that the building's working properly, but they also need to understand their role in that, which is, you know, our job as a property team is to provide you with a comfortable and productive space. But you know, there are things outside of our control that will make you comfortable and productive. So that's something that we have to be able to talk about.
I mean, certainly, I mean, it's a topic that I always am keen to talk about, because I talk to a lot of people in the capital markets, and as you know better than I do, you know, as you say, there are a lot of people in that space who, both from a profit motive and also from other reasons, are very keen on understanding, you know, the ESG performance of their buildings, and in many cases don't have the data that they would like, and also bump into, I guess, issues around data not flowing around very easily between landlord and tenant and occupier. And I guess that's one of the challenges, hopefully, that what you're doing can help, is to break down some of those barriers between the classic landlord tenant, to make sure the information does flow more easily, because obviously for an asset manager it can be hard to get visibility of how an asset's actually performing.
Yeah, absolutely. That's something that we're kind of passionate about, actually. And I think from real world experience, you know, the painful side of siloed information and so on. You know, I come from a background of report writing, where your report would be handed in and then be in somebody's inbox for the rest of eternity. But what we've tried to do is really open the lid on how a building's working and find ways of sharing that with stakeholders at every level. So all the way from an asset manager who tend, they're not going to care about the nuts and bolts of a fan coil unit. Understandably, they've got 200 building portfolio to worry about. What they do care about is, are we going in the right direction? So we came up with a pretty boring view, but it's a league table of performance for a building, and it's been one of the most motivating things we've ever done. Is one of the biggest drivers of change, because it's human nature. No one wants to be at the bottom of the league table. Being at the top is great and something to shout about. And in some cases, customers kind of screen dumped their league tables and published them on LinkedIn, which was really, funnily enough, we've had a few good accolades over the years, but those unprompted things like that are almost better. It's almost better that you're like, wow, that's really good, that they're proud of what they've done, and they're proud that, and we're proud that they're using our tool to show it. But the other end of the scale is, that's the asset managers. You can drill down from a poorly performing asset all the way down to the thing that is actually, the highest priority issue within that building, and share that information with engineers. So the hands-on engineers who actually have to go and fix these things. And again, I'd love to say we thought of all of this in advance. We didn't. It's good fortune. But when something gets fixed, something's raised, and there's a problem with this valve is clearly jammed, or it's gunked up. So please, can you go and have a look? And then you can see the improved performance immediately afterwards, and the corresponding either comfort improvements or energy improvements. Then on our platform, you can give the engineer a bit of credit there.
Yeah,
and what we found, absolutely, but for many FM engineers, it's like the first time their boss's boss had ever even seen their name, because they're hidden in these windowless basement offices and only phoned when there's a problem and when people are angry. So
let alone given some thanks.
Absolutely, yeah. The best you get is for people to sort of not be moaning at you for a bit more. So changing that is I personally, because I've been that guy who's been shouted at relentlessly. So changing that a little bit, getting credit where credit's due, and and sharing the problems, but sharing the credit for the improvement, and enjoying that together. It sounds a little bit fanciful, but it's not. This is where we really need to go with buildings.
So I suppose a couple of last points come to mind before we wind up, and I suppose it's a bit of yin and yang, but I mean, there's obviously some great opportunities for those people at the sharp end, the FM profession. It'd be great to hear what your view of the opportunities for them are, but also, are there skills gaps that this is highlighting? Are there things the FM industry needs to respond to in terms of skills and knowledge for their team? And on the other side of that, what are the opportunities that you think that the FM industry particularly can get from this data and this analytics?
I think there's an opportunity really for an FM, a revolution. That sounds a bit strong, but I think we've for decades now we've been working with planned preventative maintenance, which certainly was appropriate at the time. There are so much more efficient ways of working, so many more efficient ways of working now, using data to drive that. Equally, data will highlight anomalies. The other end of the scale is that data can give quality assurance. Don't go and maintain that thing. It's absolutely clearly working fine, and here's the proof for your customer that it's working fine. So why don't we do it like that? So the opportunity there, I think, is all about the whole industry accepting that this can change, and that needs buy-in from FM's customers as well, because often the pushback you hear, not pushback, but the complaint you hear from FM is that our customers insist on us working like this, because that's how it's always been done. And you have to be bold, and it's the pioneers who are really breaking the mold at the moment. So that, I think, that is really exciting opportunity for FM, and I also think there's an opportunity for them to improve margins. There's a potential. They won't thank me for saying this, but like for a lower cost but higher margin service. If you can get those kind of levels of human resource efficiency, where it's first fix, right person first time, which kind of leads on to your question about skills gap. I mean, it's possibly not so much a skills gap as appropriateness of role. So I mean, in FM, in hard services FM, let's say, in the engineering M&E side, often you'll get a mechanical engineer or an electrical engineer, and they're both acting as a building services engineer, and those skills are obviously somewhat different. It seems to be increasingly, I don't know about increasingly, but it seems to be quite rare now that you get someone who's actually has a full building services qualification. Now, whether that needs to change, or and there needs to be more opportunities for an engineer who's gone down one particular discipline to then formally broaden that out into formal building services. Once you're there, I mean, the job is really to understand how the building physics works, I suppose, how flow rates affect the performance of different pieces of equipment and so on. Our job at the data end is not to throw data at people. It's to assess it and point them in the right direction of what needs to be done. So in terms of skills gap, yeah, definitely. I think it's not a skills gap that you might expect, that people are not literate with computers and so on. I think that is, it had been the case. I think, as we evolve, I mean, millennials are now running buildings.
Yeah.
They know how a computer works, and in fact, the opposite is true, is that they're almost incensed when they can't see
Yes, exactly.
don't have visibility of a building. So why can't I can see the weather in Morocco, so why can I not see what temperature is on the floor above me? Yeah. So
that's almost good, isn't it? That I suppose so many things flow almost from what we can do on our smartphones, and we say, well, it's no longer acceptable not to have that kind of functionality with commercial assets, for example, like this. That almost that consumer experience has driven so much expectation in a positive way that we should have that. Well, this has been fascinating, Mike, and I'd like to obviously catch up with you in the future on some other themes, given how ESG is such on the agenda now for both residential and commercial real estate, and brown discounts and green premiums, and looking at retrofit costs. All these issues would be great to talk again. But in the meantime, thanks so much for your time, and it's been a pleasure to talk to you as ever, Mike.
Lovely. Thanks for having me, Andrew. Great pleasure.